It's been years, and I shouldn't be telling this, but I've got to get it off my chest. If you're listening to this, I'm probably long gone. Name's Ben Walker. I'm no expert on Bigfoot or any of that, but I saw something once. Something I never thought I'd see. It was September 2014, out near Mount Jefferson. The air was thick, wet. You know, the kind of rain that doesn't really stop but just keeps you damp. I was up there for a solo hike, hoping to catch a glimpse of something nice for the camera. There was a chill in the air, the kind you feel in your bones, even though it wasn't that cold. I remember hearing the sound of wet leaves underfoot, just that gentle squish-squish sound as I moved through the woods. Then, 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, like something was testing the wood. I didn't know what to make of it, but I froze. It was the first thing that made me wonder. I know how this sounds, but I still have the footage, the clip of it, if anyone ever wants to see it. But I haven't shown anyone. Maybe I never will. Because what happened after, I don't think anyone would believe me. The trail up to Mount Jefferson had been my escape for about 5 years by then. I'd moved to Sisters, Oregon in 2009, needed somewhere quiet after the divorce. The town had maybe 1,500 people, and most of them knew each other's business. I worked at the hardware store on Cascade Avenue, sold nails and paint to weekend warriors building decks. It was simple work, paid the bills, kept me busy. On Thursdays, when the store closed early, I'd drive the 23 miles out to the trailhead and just walk. The forest was the only place where my thoughts stopped racing. The sound of my boots on packed dirt, the rustle of Douglas fir in the wind, the distant call of a raven. It was like therapy, I guess, but cheaper. That particular Thursday, September 18th, the rain had been falling since Tuesday. Not a hard rain, just a constant drizzle that made everything smell like wet earth and pine. I parked my truck at the Weiches Creek trailhead around 2 in the afternoon. There were no other cars, which wasn't unusual for a weekday. I grabbed my camera, a Canon EOS that I'd bought used off Craigslist, and started up the path. The trail was muddy, slick in places, and I had to watch my footing. Overhead, the clouds hung low and gray, pressing down on the treetops. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I walked for maybe 45 minutes, climbing gradually through old-growth forest. The trees here were massive, some of them probably 200 years old. Their trunks were thick with moss, and ferns grew in dense clusters along the forest floor. I stopped at a clearing where the trail opened up, giving a view of the valley below. The rain had softened to a mist. I pulled out my camera and took a few shots of the landscape, the gray-green mountains fading into fog. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks, solid, distinct, like wood striking. Wood. They came from somewhere deeper in the forest, maybe 100 yards to my left. I stopped breathing for a second, just listening. The knocks were evenly spaced, deliberate. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. Then silence. I told myself it was probably a woodpecker, or maybe a branch falling against a tree. Wind could do strange things in these woods, but the rhythm was too precise, too intentional. I stood there for a full minute, my heart beating a little faster, waiting for another sound. Nothing came, just the soft patter of rain on leaves and the distant gurgle of a creek. I shook my head, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "Just an animal," I muttered. The words didn't make me feel any better. I kept walking, but the unease stayed with me. It was like a weight in my chest, heavy and cold. Every snap of a twig made me turn around. Every shadow between the trees seemed darker, more solid. I'd been hiking these trails for years and never felt this way. The forest had always been peaceful, almost sacred, but now it felt like something was watching me. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being ridiculous. But my hands were shaking slightly as I held the camera. The trail climbed steeper as I moved higher up the mountain. The rain picked up again, turning from mist back to drizzle. I pulled my hood up, ducking my head against the cold drops. My boots squelched in the mud, and I could feel water seeping through the seams. About 20 minutes later, I came across something that stopped me cold. Footprints. They were in a patch of soft mud just off the trail, near a cluster of huckleberry bushes. At first, I thought maybe another hiker had passed through. But when I knelt down to look closer, my stomach dropped. The prints were enormous, at least 16 inches long, maybe more. They were shaped like a human foot, but wider, with clear impressions of 5 toes. The depth of them suggested something heavy, something that weighed far more than any person. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen showed no signal. I was too deep in the woods. Instead, I used my camera, snapping several shots from different angles. My hands were trembling now, and not from the cold. "Maybe a bear," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. But bears don't walk upright, and these prints were clearly bipedal, one in front of the other in a walking stride. I stood up, my eyes scanning the tree line. The forest suddenly felt much bigger, much darker. Every shadow could be hiding something. I thought about heading back to the truck, calling it a day. But something kept me there. Curiosity, maybe, or stubbornness. I took a deep breath and kept walking, following the trail higher. The footprints disappeared into the underbrush, heading away from the path. I didn't follow them. That was probably the smartest decision I made that day. As I continued up the mountain, the unease in my gut grew stronger. It felt like a warning, like some primal part of my brain was telling me to turn around, but I didn't listen. It was getting close to 4 o'clock when I decided to turn back. The light was starting to fade, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. I'd climbed about 3 miles from the trailhead, high enough that the air felt thinner, colder. I was about to head down when the smell hit me. It wasn't the usual scent of damp forest, of rotting leaves and wet bark. This was something else entirely. Heavy, musky, like wet dog mixed with something rotten, something that had been dead for days. The stench was so strong it made my eyes water. I pulled my jacket collar up over my nose, trying to block it out. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. The smell seemed to be coming from all around me, thick in the air. I'd smelled dead animals before, deer carcasses left by cougars, but this was different, stronger, more pungent. It clung to my clothes, my hair, making me gag. I backed up a few steps, looking around frantically. There was nothing visible, no carcass, no obvious source. Just trees and underbrush, and that overwhelming stench. My heart was pounding now, my breath coming in short gasps. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. I started walking faster, heading back down the trail. The smell followed me for maybe 100 yards before it finally faded. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerging from the trees. But there was nothing. Just gray rain and dark forest. By the time I got back to my truck, my legs were shaking and my shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the cold. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, just breathing, trying to calm down. The rational part of my brain was telling me it was just a dead elk, or maybe a bear den. But the primal part, the part that still remembered when humans were prey, that part knew better. I drove home in a daze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. By the time I pulled into my driveway and sister's, it was almost dark. I lived in a small rental house on the edge of town, a one-bedroom place with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Inside, I stripped off my wet clothes and stood in the shower for 20 minutes, letting hot water wash away the mud and the memory of that smell. But it didn't wash away the unease. That stayed with me, settling into my bones like the cold. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those footprints in my mind, kept hearing those 3 knocks. Around midnight, I got up and transferred the photos from my camera to my laptop. The footprints looked even stranger on the screen, impossibly large and clear. I opened a browser and started searching. Large footprints, Oregon forest. Unexplained knocking sounds, woods. The results that came back made my stomach turn. Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch encounters. I'd heard the stories before, seen the grainy photos and shaky videos. I'd always dismissed them as hoaxes or misidentifications. But now, staring at my own photos, I wasn't so sure. A week went by. I tried to forget about it, told myself it was nothing. But the memory kept nagging at me, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. On Thursday, I called my friend Marcus, asked if he wanted to go hiking. Marcus was a good guy, worked construction, and didn't ask too many questions. I didn't tell him about the footprints or the knocks. I just said I wanted some company on the trail. We drove out to Mount Jefferson the following morning, the weather clear for the first time in weeks. The forest looked different in the sunlight, less threatening. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We reached the clearing where I'd first heard the knocks. I pointed out the area to Marcus, kept it casual. "Nice spot," he said, taking a drink from his water bottle. Then from somewhere in the trees we heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Marcus froze, his eyes going wide. "What was that?" he asked. I didn't answer. I was already reaching for my camera, my hands shaking. The knocks came again, closer this time. Knock, knock, knock. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Ben, we should go." His voice was tight, scared, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my camera raised, waiting. The forest went silent after that. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just a heavy, oppressive quiet that pressed down on us. Marcus was breathing hard beside me, his hand still gripping my arm. "Ben, seriously, we need to leave." I nodded, finally lowering the camera. We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the tree line. Nothing moved, nothing showed itself, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like invisible eyes tracking our every step. We made it about 50 feet down the trail before Marcus stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, a low rumble. It came from deep in the forest, a guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl but wasn't quite a voice either. It was something in between, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Bear?" Marcus asked, but his voice didn't sound convinced. I shook my head. I'd heard bears before. This wasn't a bear. This was something bigger, something that shouldn't exist. The rumble came again, closer now, and then we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving through the underbrush toward us. "Run," I said, and we did. We ran down that trail like our lives depended on it, our boots slipping on wet rocks, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, the footsteps kept pace, crashing through the forest. I risked a glance back and saw a shadow between the trees, tall and broad, moving with a loping gait. My chest was burning, my legs screaming, but I didn't stop. Marcus was ahead of me, his face pale with terror. We didn't slow down until we reached the trailhead, throwing ourselves into Marcus's truck and peeling out onto the Forest Service road. Only when we hit the highway did I finally look back. The forest stood silent and still, holding its secrets. Marcus dropped me off at my house without saying much. His hands were still shaking on the wheel. "What the hell was that, Ben?" he asked finally. I shook my head. "I don't know." But I did know. Deep down, I knew exactly what it was. I just didn't want to say it out loud. After Marcus left, I went inside and pulled up the footage I'd taken. The camera had been recording during our retreat. I watched it 3 times, my heart sinking with each viewing. At the edge of the frame, just visible between the trees, was a shape, dark, massive, humanoid. It was blurry, obscured by branches, but it was there. Bigfoot. The word felt wrong in my mouth, like admitting to a delusion. But there it was, captured on video. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me, watching the footage over and over. The shape in the trees never became clearer, never revealed itself fully. It was just a shadow, a suggestion of something massive and alive. But combined with the footprints, the knocks, the smell, the pieces fit together in a way I couldn't ignore. Around 3 a.m, I heard it. 3 knocks. They came from outside, from somewhere in the direction of the forest. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Knock, knock, knock. The same rhythm, the same deliberate spacing. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. My house sat at the edge of town, with forest starting about 100 yards behind my property. In the darkness, I could barely make out the tree line. But there, just at the edge of visibility, I saw a movement, a shape, darker than the surrounding night, standing between two pines. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Then, slowly, the shape backed into the trees and disappeared. I called the sheriff's office the next morning. Deputy Anderson came out around 10, a middle-aged guy with a weathered face and skeptical eyes. I showed him the footage, told him about the knocks and the footprints. He watched the video without expression, then handed my laptop back. "Mr. Walker, that could be anything. A bear standing on its hind legs, a hiker, shadows playing tricks." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Look, I know these woods. Been hunting them for 30 years. There's no such thing as Bigfoot. If there was, someone would have found real evidence by now." He left after giving me a pamphlet on wildlife safety and suggesting I might want to avoid solo hikes for a while. I stood on my porch, watching his patrol car drive away, feeling more alone than ever. No one was going to believe me. Not the sheriff, not Marcus, not anyone. I was on my own with this. The next few days passed in a blur. I called in sick to work, couldn't face the routine of selling hammers and screwdrivers. Instead, I stayed home, curtains drawn, watching the tree line. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed suspicious. On the 4th night, the knocks came again, 3 times, from the forest behind my house. This time I didn't look. A week later, I was back at work, trying to pretend everything was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop seeing that shadow in the trees. Customers would ask me questions about drill bits or paint colors, and I'd just stare at them, my mind elsewhere. My boss, a guy named Jim with a beer gut and thinning hair, pulled me aside on Friday. "You okay, Ben? You seem off." I told him I was fine, just dealing with some personal stuff. He didn't push, but I could see the concern in his eyes. That night, I made a decision. I was going to go back to the mountain one more time, not to hike, not to camp, just to drive up and see if I could find more evidence, something concrete that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. I loaded my camera and a flashlight into my truck and drove out to the Forest Service Road just after sunset. The night was clear, unusually warm for late September. Stars were visible above the tree line, scattered across the sky like diamonds. I parked at a turnout about a mile from the trailhead and got out. The forest was alive with sounds. Crickets chirping, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I walked along the road, my flashlight cutting a weak beam through the darkness. After about 20 minutes, I found more footprints. They were in a patch of soft dirt on the shoulder, fresh enough that the edges hadn't crumbled yet. I knelt down, measuring them with my hand. 18 inches at least. My heart was racing as I took photos, the camera flash momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw something else. About 10 feet into the woods, there was a pile of stones. They were stacked in a rough pyramid, balanced carefully on top of each other. The arrangement was too deliberate to be natural. I stood up slowly, shining my flashlight around. The beam caught something moving between the trees. A figure, massive and dark, watching me. This time I didn't run. I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. "I know you're there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you are." The figure didn't move. We stood there, man and Bigfoot, separated by maybe 50 feet in an entire universe of disbelief. Then from somewhere in its chest came a sound. Low, rumbling, almost like words, but not quite. It wasn't threatening, it was almost curious, like it was trying to communicate. I took a step forward, my hand outstretched. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said. "I just want to understand." The figure shifted, and in the moonlight filtering through the trees, I caught a glimpse of its face. Flat features, dark eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. It was real. It was Bigfoot, and it was looking at me with what I could only describe as intelligence. The moment stretched between us, fragile as glass. Then, without warning, the creature turned and melted into the forest. 1 second it was there, massive and undeniable. The next, it was gone, leaving only the sound of heavy footsteps receding into darkness. I stood frozen, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible. But I'd seen it, up close, clear enough to know it wasn't a bear or a man in a costume. It was Bigfoot, and it had been watching me with eyes that held awareness, maybe even understanding. I walked back to my truck in a daze, my legs moving on autopilot. The drive home felt like a dream, the headlights cutting through darkness, while my mind replayed what I'd seen. By the time I got back to my house, it was almost midnight. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, just breathing, trying to process everything. The footage on my camera showed the stacked stones clearly, the massive footprints. But the creature itself had been too fast, too far away. The video showed only a blur of movement, a shadow disappearing into trees. Still, I knew what I'd seen. Over the next week, I became obsessed. I started reading everything I could find online about Bigfoot sightings in Oregon. There were dozens of reports, going back decades. People describing the same things I'd experienced. The knocks, the smell, the feeling of being watched. Some claimed to have seen the creature up close, just like I had. Others had only found footprints or heard strange vocalizations. But the pattern was there, undeniable. These weren't random hoaxes or mistakes. There was something in these forests, something that had learned to stay hidden. I went back to the mountain 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time, I found signs. Fresh footprints near Wycus Creek, broken branches bent at angles too high for any normal animal. Once I found another stack of stones, this time arranged in a line like markers. But I never saw the creature again. It was like it had shown itself to me once, delivered its message, and then retreated back into the shadows. The knocks still came, though. Every few nights I'd hear them from the forest behind my house. 3 knocks, always 3, like a reminder that it was still out there, still watching. Marcus called me once, asking if I wanted to grab a beer. I could hear the forced casualness in his voice, the way he was trying to pretend that day on the mountain hadn't happened. I made an excuse, told him I was busy with work. The truth was, I couldn't face him. Couldn't face the questions I knew he wanted to ask but was too scared to voice. After that, he stopped calling. I understood. Some experiences change you so fundamentally that you can't go back to who you were before. That day in the forest had changed both of us, but I was the only one willing to accept what we'd really seen. By November, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to share the footage. Not with anyone. The video sat on my hard drive, backed up on an external drive hidden in my closet, but I never uploaded it, never showed it to friends or posted it online. People would just call it fake, or worse, they'd believe it and come looking. The last thing I wanted was hordes of hunters and cryptozoologists tramping through those woods, scaring away something that had probably lived there peacefully for generations. The creature hadn't hurt me, hadn't threatened me. If anything, it had shown restraint, patience, maybe even a kind of gentleness. I thought a lot about why Bigfoot had revealed itself to me. It could have stayed hidden, could have avoided me entirely, but it chose to make contact, to let me see it. Maybe it was curious about me, the way I'd been curious about it. Or maybe it was trying to tell me something, to communicate across the impossible gulf between our species. I'd read stories about indigenous peoples in the Pacific Northwest, tribes that had legends about the Sasquatch. They didn't treat it as a monster or a mystery. To them, it was just another part of the forest, a being worthy of respect. I started to understand that perspective. Winter came early that year. By mid-December, snow had blanketed Sisters and the surrounding mountains. I stopped going out to the trailhead, partly because of the weather, and partly because I felt like my journey was complete. I'd seen what I needed to see. The hardware store stayed busy with people buying snow shovels and ice melt. I went through the motions of my job, smiling at customers, making small talk about the weather. But inside, I was different. I carried a secret that separated me from everyone around me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pull up the footage and watch it again. The blurry shape in the trees, the massive footprints, the stacked stones. It was real. I knew it was real. My sister called on Christmas Eve asking if I wanted to come to Portland for the holidays. I told her I had to work, which was a lie. The truth was I didn't want to leave, didn't want to miss the knocks if they came. I spent Christmas Day alone, eating leftover pizza and watching snow fall outside my window. Around 9 at night, I heard them. 3 knocks, clear and distinct even through the wind and snow. I walked to the back window and looked out at the forest. The trees were heavy with snow, their branches bowed under the weight. In the moonlight, everything looked clean and pure, untouched. But I knew better. I knew what was out there, hidden in the shadows between the pines. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to the darkness. And maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was real, but I swear I heard a low rumble in response. A sound that could have been wind through the trees, or could have been something else. Something acknowledging my greeting. Years have passed since that September. I still live in Sisters, though I moved to a different house, one closer to town. The hardware. The store closed in 2017, and I took a job at the ranger station, doing administrative work and answering phones. It's quieter work, and it keeps me close to the forest without actually being in it. I've thought about going back to Mount Jefferson, walking those trails again. But I haven't. Some part of me is afraid that if I go back, I'll see nothing. That the magic, if you can call it that, will be gone. Or worse, I'll find evidence that someone else has seen what I saw, and the secret will no longer be mine alone. The footage is still on my hard drive. I've never deleted it, but I've never shown it to anyone either. Sometimes I wonder if I should, if I have some kind of obligation to prove that Bigfoot exists. But then I think about what would happen. The media circus, the skeptics, the believers, the hunters. The forest would be swarmed with people trying to capture or kill something that's managed to stay hidden for centuries. And for what? Proof? Validation? It doesn't seem worth it. The creature chose to reveal itself to me for a reason, and I think that reason was trust. Breaking that trust for 15 minutes of fame feels like a betrayal. I've had other experiences since then. Nothing as dramatic as that first encounter, but small things that remind me I'm not alone. Sometimes, when I'm working late at the ranger station, I'll see footprints in the mud outside that are too large to be human. Once, I found an arrangement of stones on my back porch, stacked in that same deliberate pyramid. I took it as a message, a reminder that the connection between us, whatever it is, still exists. The knocks come less frequently now, maybe once every few months. But when they do, I listen. 3 knocks, always 3. And I knock back. 3 times, just to let it know I'm still here, still remembering. People in town sometimes ask me if I believe in Bigfoot. It usually comes up when there's a report in the news, or someone claims to have seen something unusual in the mountains. I always smile and give a non-committal answer. Who knows, I'll say. These forests are big, lots of room for mysteries. And they'll laugh and change the subject, never knowing that the guy they're talking to has seen it, has been within 50 feet of something that's supposed to be a myth. That's fine by me. Some things aren't meant to be shared. Some truths are too strange for public consumption. At night, especially in the winter when the wind howls through the pines, I think about that creature. About where it lives, how it survives, whether there are others. The indigenous legends say the Sasquatch are guardians of the forest, spirits that protect the wild places. Maybe that's true. Maybe they're the last keepers of something we've forgotten in our rush to pave over every inch of wilderness. So here I am, telling this story to whoever might be listening. I'm older now, grayer. The years have been kind enough, I suppose. But I carry this weight with me, this knowledge that changes how I see the world. Every time I drive past Mount Jefferson, I look up at those peaks and wonder if it's still out there. I like to think it is. I like to think that somewhere in those dark forests, Bigfoot is living its life, watching over its territory, occasionally stacking stones or knocking on trees just to remind people like me that the world is bigger and stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. The question people always ask when they talk about Bigfoot is, why hasn't anyone proven it exists? And I think the answer is simple. Because the ones who've really seen it, who've had genuine encounters, we don't talk. We keep the secret. Not out of fear of being mocked, though that's part of it, but because we understand, instinctively, that some things are meant to remain hidden. That proof would destroy the very thing we're trying to protect. The footage will stay on my hard drive. The story will stay with me. And when I'm gone, maybe someone will find it and wonder. Or maybe it'll be deleted, lost to time, just another digital ghost. What did it want? Why did it reveal itself to me? These are questions I'll probably never answer. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe it was lonely. Maybe it saw something in me, some kindness or respect that made it feel safe. Or maybe I'm overthinking it, and there was no deeper meaning. Just two beings sharing space in a forest, both trying to understand each other across an impossible divide. The truth is, I'll never know for sure. And that's okay. Not everything needs an explanation. Tonight, as I write this, it's raining again. That same soft drizzle that was falling back in September 2014. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the window cracked open, listening to the sound of water on leaves. The forest is dark beyond my yard, a wall of shadows and secrets. And then, just as I'm about to close my laptop, I hear them, 3 knocks, soft, distant, coming from the tree line. My breath catches. After all these years, after all this time, it's still there, still watching, still remembering. I walk to the window and look out into the rain. The darkness is complete, impenetrable. But somewhere in those trees, I know Bigfoot is standing, listening to the same rain, living its quiet life. I raise my hand and knock 3 times on the window frame. The sound echoes softly in the night. And then from the forest, I hear it again. 3 knocks, a response, a conversation without words. We understand each other, the creature and I. We share this secret, this impossible truth. The rain continues to fall. The forest holds its breath. And I, Ben Walker, close my eyes and smile. Because I know what's out there. I've always known. And that knowledge, that certainty, is enough.